Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. This happened over 20 years ago. There was a phase my friends and I went through where we would go on dares and little nightly adventures. It was a late summer night. I went with 3 other friends, and we 4 would always get up to mischief together. The dare that night was to go into a famous abandoned hospital, which was about 20 minutes away by car. Actually, I've been to this abandoned hospital 3 times before, and I wasn't all that impressed or interested in going again. I mean, there was nothing but mountains and fields as far as the eye could see, as it was in the countryside and there were no girls there, so I was all like, what's the point, guys? But they managed to convince me that there wasn't much else to do that night and it would be fun. There were a bunch of rumors about the place. They say that it was originally a mental institution, that it was the largest abandoned hospital in all of Kanto, and they say that it's cursed, and there are even rumors about a secret basement. There were plenty of rumors like these, but now that I am older, I realized that I didn't ever doubt the credibility of these rumors. Unlike today, back then, these rumors were spread by word of mouth, and possibly by chain mail or text messages. We didn't have the internet to rely on. My friend drove and we took flashlights. It was really dark since it was in the middle of nowhere. We walked a few minutes in the dark and the road widened a little, and then we saw the hospital. It gave off a strange presence that night. It felt different. It was a 3-story building with a rooftop. This rooftop was said to be one of the most active spots for paranormal activities. They say that something lingers there. Well, the first time I came to the hospital, I thought that it was pretty scary, but now it was the 3rd time, and nothing had happened the previous times I came, so I wasn't really feeling creeped out or anything. It could have been because I was with 3 other guys too. We were passing through the overgrown bushes and thickets outside of the hospital ground, and that was when I came up with an idea. It wasn't really a dare if we all went as a group, I said to my friends. So I said that why don't we go up to the roof one by one, and then, when you get there, call the next person up. For the other guys, it was their first time, so I was hoping to see them getting all freaked out, and I thought it was a pretty decent idea. We played rock, paper, scissors to decide the order of who would go first and etc. I will refer to the friend who went first as A from here on out. A started off through the busted entrance doors, and we stood outside and watched. My 2 other friends were joking around and saying things like, "Why don't we just leave him here and go home?" Then we heard A shout from the rooftop, "Oi!" He got up there way faster than I expected. He must have sprinted. I looked up at A, and there were some other silhouettes up there with him, waving down to us. "What? There are other people here?" I said out loud. As I said, the abandoned hospital had become kind of legendary, as there was still medical equipment and records scattered throughout the building. It still felt like a hospital, and at the same time, it felt very abandoned. Does that make sense? I think this is why there were so many rumors. So it was popular with the young people in our area, as well as people from outside the area. There were some who just wanted to see it from a tourist point of view, I guess. If you drove past on a weekend, you could always see cars parked there and people taking photos. I'm not sure if all these people went in, but it proved to be a popular place. So I said to my friend next to me, "Ah, man, there are people here even on weekday nights. This ain't good, man." Then he was called to the roof, which only left me and one other friend. Then I heard my friends call out to my final friend. "Oi!" they shouted. I looked closer and there seemed to be even more people up there than before. I guess that they were making friends. There looked to be about 10 people there. It didn't seem fun if there was a whole gang of people there. It was supposed to be spooky, right? And while I was thinking this, I heard my friend, who was the last to leave my company, call out to me. "Oi!" Charming. Everyone on the roof seemed to just be pacing around restlessly. I headed into the entrance, and the walls were scrawled with graffiti, and I climbed the stairs to the roof. When I got out to the top, I felt a blast of cold night air against my skin, and then I was shocked by something. I could only see my 3 friends on the roof. I felt for sure that I was about to be pranked, but I decided to ask the obvious question. "Guys, weren't there others up here with you?" We just looked at one another, puzzled for a while in silence. The wind blew, and then suddenly, we all heard a terrible voice calling, "Oi!" Someone started running and we all followed. We bolted down through the abandoned hospital, through the gap in the fence, and I took a look back at the roof. And I swear, I saw shadowy figures moving back and forth on the roof. The wind carried the dreadfully moaning "oi" sound, and we scrambled into the car and hightailed it out of there. We stopped at the closest light source, which happened to be a convenience store, and we never went back. I am a doctor, and I have worked in many hospitals, but I feel like sharing an experience that happened when I was practicing before getting my full accreditation. I was sent to a hospital to earn my stripes, and this is what happened out there. A few weird and arguably spooky things have happened over the course of my career, but this one sticks out in my mind. Let me explain a little about the layout of the hospital. The main building is basically shaped like a capital letter L. There was a newer part of the building, which was just off the L, just at the tip of the long side of that L. The main building was really run down and old, and the lights were usually out at night if they weren't broken. It wasn't a great place to be. The nurses' area was well lit, just this long L shape wasn't. So, as you might expect, as a junior doctor on the night shift in a place which was ill lit, yeah, I had my apprehensions and I had to wrestle with some fear there. The nurses' station was well lit though, and that's where I chose to hang out since I was on call. I sat there dreading the call, not because I didn't want to help or fulfill my oath, but I just hated venturing into the darkness alone. Well, one early morning during the infancy of my residency, I received a call. I think it came in at around 2 a.m. It was from a patient at the new building. But I knew that to get to the new building, I would have to pass through the L-shaped dark old building, as I mentioned before. I was scared of the dark, but more scared of the patients. The hospital that I was earning my stripes in was one for the mentally insane. Usually, you wouldn't see the patients unless you weren't in their specific room or into the isolation wards. Now, I want to tell you that I was very careful each time I unlocked the door, just in case there was a patient on the other side of it. and since it was 2 a.m., I was reasonably confident that all but one patient who called would be in bed asleep. So, I checked that there was no one in the L-shaped building, and I began heading towards the main building to answer the call. All the doors in the building are sliding doors, and they all face the hallway. I was a little nervous that one of them would slide open and that I would be alone in the dark with a patient. I decided to walk as quickly as I could so that I could get to the new brighter building as fast as I could. And I had a long way to go, and I was dreading it. Usually, I'm not so jumpy, but for some reason, that night I was. With every step I took, I heard my heels echo in the hall. Then, I heard another sound mix in, another set of footprints. I stopped, and then the footprints behind me stopped after a step or two. Never in my life before or after has it felt like every strand of hair was standing on end. I decided to start walking quickly, but the second that I did, I heard the footsteps behind me develop into a run, and they were getting closer. I ran for a few meters and stopped out of pure fear. My legs wouldn't carry me. I was faced with a terrible dilemma: to look back or not. I tried to push the notion of a ghostly spirit chasing me out of my mind. I had a duty of care. I pulled myself together for the sake of the patients. But I'll admit, I was terrified of whatever had been chasing me. I looked back, and there was no one there. That was enough. I panicked and scrambled for any available light source, but as I turned to run, I felt a sharp pull. Something had a hold of my lab coat and was pulling me back into the dark. I felt a new emotion. Anger had now replaced fear. I must have been struggling to get away for about 10 seconds. It could have been less. Before, I saw nothing when I turned back, but now I was certain that I would, as I noticed something in my peripheral field of vision. I turned, and I was faced with a very small-framed old lady. She couldn't have been taller than 130 to 140 centimeters. That's about 4 feet 5 inches. It was a patient, and thank God it was. I took her back to her room and asked to go back to sleep. She was silent and complicit. I headed to the main building to answer that call, and I continued to think about her though. I was about 180 centimeters, or about 5'9", and she wasn't there when I looked back. I had no idea how she was able to sneak up on me and where she hid when I turned around, not to mention the reason why she didn't want anything. I should have heard her sliding a door open maybe, or was she waiting for someone that whole time in the dark? It was silent in that hallway. It was very mysterious. I was too scared to go back through that hallway again that night, so I stayed in the other newer ward. Since I was in a hospital, I chose to believe that it was a patient rather than something paranormal. And it's an experience that I won't ever forget. Three years ago, I was admitted to the hospital with kidney stones. It was horrible. On the first day, I was pretty much okay during the daytime, but at night, I felt pain like you wouldn't believe. It really was the worst pain that I have ever felt in my life. It got so bad that night that I was thinking of calling the nurse, but I thought that I would try to endure it for as long as possible. I thought that, if the stone passed, the pain would go away. I had been there sweating trying to endure the pain for about an hour and when the door opened, I thought to myself, during this hour no patients came and went, so I guess it must be a nurse doing some rounds. Oh great, maybe I'll get some painkillers, I thought. Not you. I heard a male voice mutter in a soft voice. It seemed like the owner of that voice was shuffling around in slippers. He was going around the beds, and I was in a 6th bedroom, and at night all the partition curtains were drawn. It sounded like this person was looking for something, as I heard him once again mutter, "Not you," as he passed around the room. I started to feel sick and chills were shooting up my back. I was really suffering with the pain. I could see a silhouette through the partition curtains. I didn't want this guy to know that I was awake because then I would have to speak to him. And because I was hurting, there was no way that I wanted to have a chit-chat. I laid my head on the pillow and closed my eyes. And the next thing I knew, it was morning. Because I was new in the hospital, I felt that I didn't know the people in my room well enough to ask them about last night. Like I said, I was in a 6th bedroom, and everyone in here seemed to be in for various minor issues. I read the room and understood that it wasn't a particularly talkative bunch. No one wants to chat much if they are in pain, I guess. After a day or two passed, there was a change in the room. The guy who was next to me left, and the new guy came in. The new guy was a middle-aged man. He was more talkative than the others, and we had a short conversation, and he told me that he was in the hospital with gastric pain, and he suspected it was a stomach ulcer. He said that he would be moving on to another ward after the surgery. I was still in pain with the descent of the stones into my bladder, and it was getting really bad now. The pain was back with a vengeance. It was nighttime when the pain got worse again. It was similar to that night, and I heard the man walk around the ward. Then just like clockwork, I heard the same low male voice mutter, "Not you." What the hell was this guy doing here again? I wondered. Then I heard him say something different for the first time. "You," he said. I heard his voice very close to my ear. I couldn't turn my body to face that direction due to the pain, and I could only turn my head. Maybe it was more than just pain, come to think of it. Maybe some unknown fear prevented me from moving. There was a man who stood beside the bed next to me. I thought about the voice and I started to think about the Grim Reaper. I managed to convince myself that that guy in the next bed would die soon. I don't know why these thoughts entered my brain, but the next thing I did was even weirder. I tried to summon enough energy to throw open the partition curtains, and I felt waves of panic wash over my mind. I didn't know what I was about to see. With the curtain now slightly pushed aside, I could see a man stood by the bed. He was wearing a white patient's gown and he was just a feeble and frail old man. I stared at him confused and dazed, and then he just shuffled his way out of the room. I thought that I was making a fuss out of nothing, and I was ashamed that I allowed my imagination to run away with me. The next morning, I passed a stone. Then in the afternoon, the doctor told me that I was going to be discharged that day. And that was a relief. The guy in my bed next to me was gone and I didn't know where he went. I was still kind of weirded out by the events of last night. Surely, if there was a guy walking around at night, the patients or the staff must have known about it. But no one seemed to know what I was talking about when I asked. Before I left, and now that I was able to move, I decided to take a little walk to see if I could find the guy He was next to me in the 6th bedroom. Something about him just lingered on my mind, and I didn't like it. I wanted to settle my curiosity, and I hoped he was okay. I went and asked the doctor about him, and I found out that the man was now in the intensive care ward. He looked almost unconscious. He looked very thin, and his face was almost expressionless. There was only a little pink left in his cheeks. I think I escaped something unworldly in that hospital. This happened when I was working as a part-time cleaner in a hospital. I would clean at around midnight as there were less patients and doctors around. It was the working hours I was given, so I couldn't really complain. One night, after all my cleaning was done, and I had put all my equipment away, I got in the elevator and headed for the ground floor. At that time, there were no doctors, nurses, or anyone around. It was really quiet, and I couldn't hear or see any of the patients. I got in the elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor, like always. Except this time, when I pressed it, the doors closed and the elevator went down. Despite me pressing the button for the ground floor of the elevator, it went down to the underground floors. I continued to press the button for the ground floor, but it was no good. The elevator stopped at the 2nd basement floor. It was really weird. It had never happened before. I didn't like this floor, especially not at night, because all that was down there were post-mortem examination rooms in the morgue. Who is calling the elevator down here at this time of night? I wondered. I was the only night shift worker that night. Why was someone messing with the elevator? I got out of the elevator on this floor, and I went to check if anyone had wandered down here. The jolting sound of the elevator doors closing shocked me, and the elevator started heading back up. It was going non-stop to the highest floor in the building. I couldn't understand why, as there was nothing but a storeroom and a door which accesses the roof up there. It was off limits to patients, and only cleaning staff like me had any business going up there. I called the elevator back to the floor I was on, and it finally arrived and the doors opened. There was no one in the elevator, but there was something wrong. I got in, and I smelled something terrible. The elevator stank of copper. I recognized the smell, and it was the smell of blood. It was inside the elevator, and yet the elevator was clean. I couldn't bear being in that elevator. I had to get out and use the stairs on the floor above. I entered the stairwell, and I was certain that someone was watching me. It felt like someone was right behind me. I ran as fast as I could up those stairs, but I couldn't escape that feeling. I felt for sure that I wasn't alone, but every time that I looked back, I realized that I was the only one on those stairs. I finished my shift and felt creeped out on the long walk home. But once I was home, I felt a little better. I had work the next day and I was a little apprehensive. I saw some of my colleagues and they were asking me if I heard the news about last night. I said that I didn't know, and I asked what happened. They said that someone had taken the elevator to the top floor and jumped. They said that the body was admitted to the morgue last night. It was shocking to hear that. I didn't really believe in anything paranormal, so I didn't even make a connection to what happened the night before, and I just got on with my work. The next day was a day off for me, and I invited a friend over for a few drinks. He is a pretty strange guy to some, I guess. He claims to have the second sight, the ability to sense the presence of the dead. I thought that he might get a kick out of my little mysterious experience, so I told him what happened. He listened carefully, but he began to get a little fidgety. I figured that he just needed the toilet, so I ignored him. Then suddenly, he shot to his feet and said, "I am leaving." I asked what the problem was. I said I had loads more of booze, and I needed his help to drink it all. He couldn't be convinced to stay though. I was annoyed at him, and instead of staying up and drinking alone, I decided to go to bed. I had a terrible nightmare that night. I was being forced into this small and confined area. Cold steel metal was all around me, and it was so horrible. The next day, I asked my friend what the problem was and why he left so abruptly. Get this, it's really weird from here on in. He said that while I was talking, for some reason, he looked over towards my door and saw a woman peering at us through the gap in the letterbox. You know, the mail slot? Well, we all know that there is no one that can fit their head through a mail slot, right? Well, you'd have to have a really flat or mashed up head, I guess. And that thought lingered in my head and made me feel quite sick. I didn't like looking at the mail slot after that. Could that be the spirit of the poor person who jumped, followed me from the morgue to my home, and watched me through the mail slot? It was too impossible to believe. I hope my friend was just messing with me. It wasn't a funny prank if that was the case though. And I ended up moving away, and things got a bit better after that. It's a weird little tale that I wanted to share. So, thank you for listening. I used to work in a hospital in the countryside, right in the middle of nowhere. It was an old building, and it probably was a lot busier a long time ago when there was more housing in the area. But like they say, progress is impossible without change. Anyway, since it was an old and outdated place, there was a payphone on one of the floors. Right in the corner it was. I always noticed it because it was bright pink, it was retro, and it only took coins, no phone cards. I never saw anyone use the thing. I was wondering if that was because it was hidden away in the corner. That's just the way it was. I noticed one day that it looked a bit busted up. Maybe someone who took some bad news that they received took it out on it or something. Either way, the handset didn't look like it sat in the cradle right, so I had the choice to dispose of it or find someone to repair it. It seemed like it still worked though, so I added it to the list of other stuff that I was supposed to get done, low priority. For some reason or another, I didn't get around to it. I just didn't want to touch the thing. I didn't like it, and I'll tell you why. I heard that thing ring occasionally, not often, maybe once a month give or take. I mean, who would be calling a hospital payphone, especially late at night? It always rang late at night. I heard it ringing during the night shift about a dozen times. Call me crazy, but I started to count how many seconds it rang for. It was always 10 seconds. It was in the corner of a quiet ward, so it was always quite alarming when you would hear that retro payphone ring. The trill of that ring echoed through the long corridors. I have to admit, when it rang, it was pretty creepy. I never tried to answer it, never wanted to. Something told me that I shouldn't answer it. Maybe it was down to the time it rang, or the quiet part of the hospital it was in, but something told me to stay clear. I didn't see anyone else answer it either. It was like there was some unwritten rule in the hospital about it. When it rang, the staff in the vicinity would ignore it, so after a while, you kind of ignore it too. One night, however, something changed. The phone rang as it usually did, and I looked over briefly, and then I heard the approaching footfall of a junior doctor. She went over and picked up the phone. I guess this was the first time she had heard it ring. A doctor down the hallway called out to her, and he told her to ignore it. But the young intern was full of vigor and eager to please, so she just went ahead and answered it cheerfully. I watched the whole thing. She didn't say a word. She held the phone close to her ear, and I watched her optimistic smile fade into a concerned frown. She then hung up. She looked so scared. Her personality wasn't so bubbly anymore. It was like that phone call took something from her. She grew darker and darker, and eventually she was signed off work with an illness. The rumor was that it was just a cold, but when she wasn't back a month later, I was told by an older colleague that she had simply retired. I don't know what happened with her, but I am glad that I got the chance to transfer to a newer hospital not long after that. I don't know if that pink payphone is still there or not, and I hope it's not. And here are the top comments for my last video. And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.